There's all kinds of different sizes, types, lengths of coax. For those who don't know me, I'm K4SJR. My name's Frank Dean. I do work in Aries, but I've been the president of the Jasper Radio Club for 17 years. Quit one time completely to get away from it. A month later, I'm president again. They say it's for life. Isn't it, Felton?
Yes.
I've just learned to embrace it. I do enjoy the Jasper Radio Club. I like radio clubs, period. This is 1.25" hardline. This is used for high frequency. It's very low loss. It's foam filled. It's got a copper tube in the center that's about a 1/2 inch in diameter, then the outside is copper. Very stiff, hard to work with, but if you're using anything from a 70 centimeter radio up and you've got any length at all, it's what you need. We've got a tower over there on the mountain that's got 1 5/8", and it looks like 2-inch water pipe, and it's made just like this. That's what the 900 repeater's on. It's one of the strongest repeaters we've got. It has very little loss, even going 155 feet up the tower. Anybody want, I'll lay these down, anybody want to look at this? This is RG400. It is heavy shielded. This is used for duplexers on a repeater. It's small cable, but it's heavy shielded and it's it's very low loss even for its size. It's this military spec and it's about $10 a foot. It's not cheap. That's why you use small pieces. I sanitized my hands first before I got into this and after and today. Let's see here. Connectors. The 1 5/8" stuff that we put on the tower, it was $26 a foot. This is 1 7/8", which is commonly used on 2-meter repeaters. If you're going any different, that's the end connector, and those things are they run $60, $70 a piece. That's why you see used ones. You can pick them up cheap and clean them out and reuse them. This is probably some of the most common that you'll see. These go with a 1/2 inch. And Ed, I don't mind walking them over there. That's for 1/2 inch hardline. You see that a lot on 2-meter stuff. Thank you. Get the tandy stuff out here. This is just a 1/4 inch hardline. Helix is used for duplexers also. I've got one end cut off of it. It's got a center, just like any coax, and then a steel tube. It's low loss. It's very well shielded. And when you're running a repeater, you got this frequency and 600 KCs or 0.6 megs up or down. It's transmitting, it's receiving and transmitting at the same time. So you have to isolate everything or it'll sound like a D104 on an 11-meter radio when you wave it in front of the speaker. Feedback, lots of feedback. This is a very common piece of coax here. Belden 9913. It's stiff. It's got a number 10 solid copper in the center. The only problem with this is it's very prone to moisture. So you've got to make sure that you seal the ends very well because it's got a hollow core. That is good for 2 meters, 70 centimeters, as long as you're not running a long run. If you're something for a base station at home, that's good stuff. Today, LMR 400 is used more than that. LMR is a little stiffer, a little harder to work with. Let's see here. All right, we're fixing to find out some of you's age. Radio Shack, anybody remember them?
Yeah, phone check.
Yeah, toys, phones. This is their version of Mini X, or Mini 8. Yeah, this is an RG58 from Radio Shack. This is Tandy, it says Tandy on it. This is an attenuator, okay?
Oh,
This,
yeah.
oh,
That's what it says.
yeah, on 11 meters, maybe, but this, and on HF, this would work fine. I got a piece of, I got some other stuff wound in it. I need to, well, it's taped in there. I'll leave it in there. But that, if you use that on 70 centimeters, 440 band, 100 foot of that, and you start off with 50 watts, on the other end of it, you've got about 15. It eats your power up. Ladder line, 450 ohm ladder line, very low loss, HF. You can also use this on 2 meters if you build a balun, and you build the balun out of RG8 coax to go with it. Most people don't use it anymore. Older hams did. I've made some baluns and used it before. If you're going a long ways and you can get this clear, I've got a 400-foot piece of this with a balun on each end of it. If I have to get antennas separated apart for an exercise, I'll use this for 2 meters. That's actually an antenna made out of it. That's a Dipole. Very common antenna.
Looks like it's really wrapped up in what you have.
Now this has just got 300 ohm twin TV lead. You remember you used to go to the back of the television, you had this little box, it said UHF, VHF, a balun. This is an HT mag mount antenna. Does great on 5 watts, short piece of coax for B and C. I've got an HTX202 that this works great on. If you put 50 watts on this, you probably let the smoke out of it. But for portable use, you've got an HT. If you, yeah, something like this. Now that one's a little heavier than this one. But for portable use with a HT, that works great. And you notice the length of it, that's a 1/4 wavelength on 2 meters. And we'll stop and talk right there. They show this a lot on Facebook. 2 meters apart, you know, a little over 6 feet, 2 meters. Anybody ever seen an oscilloscope with an AC pattern on it? It goes 0, 90, 180, 270 on the bottom, back to 0. It's just a, RF is very similar to AC. It's not quite the same, but it's similar, and that's how a wavelength goes through the air. Thank you. And that's why your antennas are a 1/4 wavelength. If it's traveling like this, you catch that 1/4 wave of it as it does this. Horizontal or vertical. Now, there's a big difference. A vertical antenna works equally poorly in all directions. That's what Pat Haynes taught me. He's a silent key now. For VHF, most everything's vertical unless you're on sideband. All your FM stuff's vertical. It just works better. For HF, if you're using a vertical, it's good for DX. If you got a lot of radials underneath it for a counterpoise to reflect your signal. Now, if this was a 20 meter 5/8 wave, it'd be 43 foot tall. And with a lot of ground radials coming out, it would be really well for working the other side of the world. Local, not so well. This is basically the same antenna. It's quarter wavelength. It's got a little coil in it to kind of match it. It's a dual band. It will work 2 meters and 70 centimeters. It's not inexpensive. It's a tram. I don't remember what it cost, but it'll handle 50 watts. Now the length of the coax to the antenna, it's a specific length. It's a number of half waves, multiple of half wavelengths for the frequency of the antenna. That helps match the antenna to give you a better standard wave ratio. And what SWR, versatile SWR means is how much of your power is going to the antenna and being distributed and how much of it's coming back. And Felton taught me this, you gotta have low SWRs. If your SWR is low, your power's going out. If you have a high SWR rating, if you've got a 3-to-1, you've lost half your power. It's being eat up by a mismatch between the antenna, the coax, and the radio. Then you get into a more gain antenna. A lot of this stuff I got from Silent Key, left it to me, and some of these I haven't even tested, but they're good for demonstrations. You have a base coil with a 5/8 wave antenna that helps to match it, and then you have a center coil. This one would be a 2 meter and a 70 centimeter, and I have no idea. Oh, it's a Lakeview. Now, there's several types of mounts. This is a Mno mount, which is a lot of your police cars and stuff use this type of mount. This one here looks kind of tired.
Is it MNO or NMO?
NMO. Did I say M? I may have. Ed, I broke this. See if you can fix it for me. PL259. I'm glad you said something. The PL259 and the 3/8 are two of the most common that you'll run into. Now this, I use this antenna to pull the microphone cable off again. Me and this cable not friends. All right, I'm gonna have to hide it. I do the simplex net on Tuesday night for Northwest Georgia Aries. And I had this big, long, high gain antenna. G7 144, single band. Used it at the SET, worked wonderful. Used it for something else 2 weeks earlier, worked great. Went to the mountain, didn't check it after we pulled it out of the building over there in Pickens, out of the church, the pole barn behind the church. One of the guys helping me grabbed the cable, and I had the LMR 600 on it. Some large cable was a little bigger than diameter than this. He gave it a pull. When he did, the connector, which is about that long, caught on the hole in the pole barn as it come out, slid the cable back, slid the connector back. Paid attention to it, had a 12-foot jumper of some flexible stuff. Pull this antenna up on a power pole. I've got it high in the air. Oh, we're gonna talk to everybody. Key it up, SWR's through the roof. No one can hear me. This mobile, that's what I used, and I had better reports than I had in weeks. It was a good night for VHF, and this is just a good half-wave antenna. And as Felton said, it's a SO239. These are very common. All right, that's enough of those. And the coax and the connectors. Now, this has saved my backside more than once, deployed somewhere, trying to do something and need to get a signal out. Little tape measure antenna, 3-element beam for 2 meters. Not expensive. A lot of people will roll these up and tape them to even make it smaller. Let's see here. What if I turn them all the same way? I bet that'd look better. Let's see here. What if yeah. That should be, okay. That doesn't look right. But anyway, this is a 3-element beam. It has gain. It's a good little antenna. You can take it and clamp it to a mast, tape it up, take it, I've got it set up here with a B and C connector, run a piece of coax out here. For what it costs to build these, they're great little antennas. They're good for field day. They're good for whatever type of 2 meters you want to do. It's not an expensive antenna to build, and they do a pretty good job. Absolutely. And there's nothing wrong with free. The more elements that you add to that to a certain point, the more gain that you get. But it tightens up the pattern. This is an 80-meter Norris electric horse fence antenna. I have used this antenna for years, and if I don't tape it, it'll be a mess. Let me give you just a second. Should have some tape in here. And Harbor Freight's got tape, 10 rolls for $5.
And the more elements that thing's got on it, it's like a shotgun.
Yep.
Get down to a full choke.
Tightens up the pattern. Now I have one of those that I've got in the process that's made out of a PVC pipe and a Walmart fishing crappie pole that's telescopic, and I've got it so where I can just pull the elements out, but I haven't finished it yet. And it's got 7 elements on it, because you know, if 3's good, 5's got to be better, and if 5's better, then 7's got to be great. You know, the old thing, bigger's better unless more prevail. The biggest 2-meter antenna that I ever built was a Quaggy. Thank you. And I've got a backpack, I can fold this up and put it in. A Quaggy has 2 quad elements on the back. And then they're regular Yagi elements, and they're made out of welding rods. I built one, you've seen the 4-foot telescopic military surplus poles. They've been around for years. Well, I built one that had a 38-foot boom out of those. Got into that bigger's better thing, Michael. I had to put a T-bar at the top with 2 cables that came down on each end, and when the wind blowed, it was like a snake. Had 19 elements. I settled back at 15 because anything past that was virtually no gain, and the pattern tightened up. I could literally be talking to a station. There was a net in Greenwood, South Carolina that I used to check into about 3 times a week. It was called the Friendly Net, and it was 158 miles out. And I could be pointed at them, and there'd be an S9, the wind blowing just a slack, and the gears in the rotator would go 0 to 9. It was very sharp, but it gave me the gain. By going from 15 elements to 19 elements, I'd passed the point of redundancy. It didn't give me anything else. It was just massive and hard to keep up. So I backed it down to a point to where it would really work. So you can't overdo it. I know that's hard for me to say, but you can. Now this antenna is an 80-meter dipole made out of electric horse fence. There's multiple strands. This is wide banded. The way that the antenna, the radio sees this, is it sees a 2-inch tube in the air. instead of a tiny piece of wire because of the width of it. It won't tune every bit of 75 and 80 without a tuner, but it'll tune a good bit of the band. You can adjust it. If you're working sideband, you can work every bit of sideband. If you're working CW digital, you can set it where it'll cover every bit of it. And that'll handle a kilowatt without a problem. This is either my lunch or laundry, I don't know. More antennas. One of the most popular antennas today, and a silent key, he's a silent key now, but he gave me this one. It is a 10 meter end-fed. Now end-feds, so they work wonderfully for some people. Sometimes I can't get them to work right. It's just, I guess it depends on the antenna and how you put it up. That one works really well. Most all of your HF antennas is like the big one, it's a dipole. You feed it in the center, it's a quarter wave on each side. An end-fed is a full half wave this way, and it uses a 9-to-1 balun as a counterpoise. I've got one, an 80 meter one at home on my tower that works great. And I've got another one that's very similar to it that doesn't. Oh, look, another one of those. I knew I had a flashlight. Now this is a 6 meter J-pole, or slim jim. It looks a lot like a J-pole. The difference being, on a J-pole, you'll have a quarter wave of ladder line that comes up in a notch, and then you'll have a half of a wave on the other side, and it's open at the top. And that gives you a slim jim. And a slim jim will give you a takeoff angle of radiation at 60 degrees, like this. And that is important if you're at Snake Creek Gap. Now, a slim jim looks very similar, and that's a 6 meter one there. Only the slim jim, you have the quarter wave that comes up. There's a notch made out in it. You have the half wave that comes up on this side. It's bridged at the top, and it comes down another quarter wave on this side. So you're using all of the wire instead of just this side, or half of this side and all of this side. So it changes your radiation angle down to about 15 degrees, so it's a low angle of takeoff. If you're on top of a mountain, that's a wonderful thing. If you're at Snake Creek and this is iron pyrite and this is iron pyrite, and when it heats and you're shooting low, you're going to hit it and your signal's going to go straight up. Or if you're...
Slim Jim, I've got one, and I didn't have a lot of coax cable, and mine's kind of got a, will it still work like that?
Yeah.
Or am I losing a lot?
It just depends on, sometimes you can put a little angle on them, they'll work. They do work better if they're vertical. I got 4 of them. I couldn't find, I had 2 of them and couldn't find them, and Felton was in Dayton a couple of years ago, and he called me and says, "You need anything?" I found some of these N9 TAXs. I said, "If you'll pick me up those 2, the other 2 will show up that I've been hunting forever." He texted me, said, "Got your antennas." About 30 minutes later, I found the other 2, so I got 4 of them now. Well, they're somewhere, but I got them packed up. But an N9 TAX is one of the most popular slim jim antennas out there. They work really well. They're a good gain antenna. You can buy them on eBay for $20, $25. They're just a really good portable, deployable antenna. Vertical antennas are good for VHF, UHF, and DX. If you're going to use them on HF for DX, because they're vertical, if you're working the other side of the world, when you hit the upper ionosphere, it's at 250 miles up, the F1, F2 layer, you hit it and you bounce off of it and your signal comes down on the other side of the planet. Well, once you go into the F1, F2 region, it doesn't matter if you're horizontal or vertical, it gets all twisted when it comes out anyway, and a vertical seems to do better for that. I've got a gentleman in my radio club, you can ask him, his call sign's K4ODL, and you can say, "Randy, how many stations have you worked around the world?" "I like 2. He doesn't tell you how many, he'll just tell you how many he needs to get to have. He's worked 358 countries. Now that's a little deceiving because sometimes they'll take a pallet and a Honda generator and a HF antenna stuck up on a wreath and call it a country, you know. So there's a lot of places that they've done that. Islands, a small island that's really not a country, they'll set up a de-expedition and they'll give it a call sign and they'll call it a country. So you get to work that. But antennas, it's a passion. What works well at my house may not work at Felton's. My dad lives about 8 miles from me. I built an antenna at my house. It didn't work really well at all. Took it down to his, put it up, and it worked good. The ground reflection, what's around you makes a big difference. For HF, there's multiple ways of putting up an HF antenna, an end-fed. You can put up an inverted V, an inverted V will help you work a little horizontal and vertical, and it gives you a pattern like a donut. It gives you more of a rounded pattern. A dipole, a half-wave dipole, up in the air, a half-wave high, will give you a pattern like two apples that's pushed together. Where the wire goes through the middle, there's a null right there. And if there's a station off the end of that wire you're trying to work, it's hard to work them because that is the low point of the gain for the antenna. Now if you go to an extended antenna like a ZEP, which is 2 half waves instead of a quarter wave on each side, it's a half wave on each side. Then you have to build a matching system so where it'll match the radio to get your SWR down. But it tightens a pattern up, and it's like you have took that apple and squished it almost flat in 2 directions. And you can do the same thing with a 5/8 wave. It'll give you more gain, but it's a narrow beam that it does that you can do with a wire like it was a beam Yagi antenna or a quad. Quad antennas used to be very popular. It's like a transformer. It's a piece of wire either in a square or a diamond shape, and you have multiple elements. And every time the wave goes between these elements, it gives you gain. A quad antenna works lower. You don't have to have it as high in the air to get optimum performance. If you've got a 20-meter Yagi, one of the most popular is a TA33. They've been around forever. You got one of those, don't you, Phil? TA33? Yeah. They're very popular antennas. To work 60 meters to get your optimum, for 20 meters, you need to have them 60 to 65 feet in the air. If it was a cubicle quad for 20, 35, 40 feet in the air, and it would work just as well. Quads are harder to keep up. They're bigger. It's a full wavelength of wire per element. Up north, it's hard to keep a quad up because snow and ice will build up on them and break them. In the south, not so much. You don't see as many people putting up a HF beam today as you used to 20 years ago or 40 years ago. So you don't see as many of those. Your big time DXers will have quads. They'll have big beams. I've got a TA33 at my house. It's not in the air right now. I've got one that's portable that I'll take a heavy tripod and I'll go put it up. We do, before the COVID, my radio club, we did a lot of exercises. In July, we would do the 13 colonies. We would meet, and my birthday's on the 4th, so we would celebrate America and Frank's birthday and grill, and somebody would bring a radio most of the time. But we would, we'd have a get-together, everybody bring a covered dish. It was, all members and wives and husbands are welcome, come on in. We get together, have 25, 30 people there, and there's always a radio sitting over here, a couple of different antennas go to it, and we'd work the 13 colonies. A good friend of mine, it's a silent key, Bill, he was really good at working DX. He, before he passed away, he'd worked 268 countries in about 5 years, so he'd really gotten into it. And I get Bill to start off because his timing was excellent, and most of the net controls knew him. So I said, Bill, get on the radio, clear the frequency. And he would listen. And when he would get in there and he would get their attention. And because a lot of times if you're working a station, you'll hear people, they'll say QRZ and you'll hear 25 people at the same time. You got to figure out, do I get in there first or I wait till it calms down and get in? And Bill would get in, and then he would work the station, and then we would grab the mic, and one right after the other, we would get in behind him to work the station. He'd kind of clear them out for us. But Bill had several antennas at his house and worked a lot of DX. One of my DXers, Randy, he's got a double extended ZEP on 75 meters. It's 387 feet long. It's a monster. He works a lot of the low bands, so he's got a monster of an antenna. 60 meters, you want to talk about 60 meters? 60 meters is a shared band. You have to have a radio that has channels. And they changed them. I got a Yazoo radio I love, FT950. Doesn't work on them anymore. What used to be channel 1 is not anymore. I'm a big user of 60 meters. I've got another radio that will work 60. 60 is a shared band with the government, with Mars and shares. So, but we do have privileges on it. You cannot run a gain antenna. You can run 100 watts now. I know it was 50 forever. They've upped it to where you can run 100 watts. But if somebody else comes on and says, hey, we need the frequency, we step back and give it to them, which I've never really seen that happen. But 60 meters, and there's some DX on 60. When the bands open up, there's some DX on 60. One of the things that I do with my radio club and Aries group, we do the regular net on the 6700 repeater, and then we dance the frequencies. We'll do simplex on 2, simplex on 70 centimeters, which don't get a lot of people on 70 centimeters. You know, it's mountain to sea and it's hard to reach the stations. 2 meters we do okay. We do 6 meters a lot. And next, we did 10 this Sunday night. Next week we will do 6 meters. I've got a 6 meter they call a trombone. It's a folded dipole. It's for a repeater. I'm going to put that thing up next week, and I'm going to put it horizontal, so where the sideband section comes. And I've got one that's vertical for FM, and we do sideband and FM. Give both of them a try. What's amazing in my county with the terrain, and it's kind of mountainous over there, is we'll go to 12 meters or 17 meters or even 15 meters local ground wave and be able to communicate with the entire county. Some places we have to use 75. But we dance the frequencies, and we've had a lot of interest in that. And from that, we've built some antennas, you know, because somebody said, well, I don't have anything for 6 meters. Well, let's build you a 6 meter dipole, you know. So antennas can be a lot of fun. They can be frustrated. G5RV, for instance, that antenna was designed for 20 meters. It's 3 half waves in phase on 20 meters. The ladder line that comes down is a matching section, and the coax on it is a perfect length to match it to make it work. With a tuner, it'll work 40, it'll work 10, it'll work 15, it'll work 80. The worst thing that ever happened to that antenna is an MFA analyzer. Hook it up and go, well, that don't read good right there. I'm going to prune it a little bit. And the next thing you know, it doesn't work anywhere. But they make 2 versions of that antenna. They make a standard and they make a long one. The standard one is 104 feet, 102 feet. The long one is 204, which they don't sell many of the long ones. How many people's got enough room to put up 200 feet span in their yard? You do? We need to get you a big antenna. We need to get you a 160. But a 160 meter antenna, if you're going to work the bottom of the band, CW and digital, you're looking at about 270 feet long. It's a monster. The top of the band, and Georgia Aries has a section on it. It's 1975, and you're looking at about 260 feet just to cover that. Now, at the pole building behind my church over there, it's actually Ron's church. He's the pastor, and he's a ham. Right now, we've got 2 HF antennas in the air. We do a lot of stuff, county, district, state, whatever. We do some work for the state there. It's the Georgia Aries Command Center for the state. I keep 2 antennas on HF in the air and a couple of VHF antennas on the air. And we'll put up 2 more. For the SET, we had 4 HF antennas all at one time working. And the only problem that we had, The 60 meter was a sloper, and the end of it sloped under one of the 80 meter antennas. And when my 80 meter guy was on there going da 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 da, on the 60 meter antenna, if you listen, you could hear it go. But that was the only interference that we had. And the 60 meter man says, hey, he was my Mars guy. Hey, Frank, you hear this? I said, I can stop this. You just hit the off switch, and that went away. There's 3 different HF antennas we had put up, 2 that stay there, 1 that's an NVIS. Anybody? What's an NVIS?
Near vertical incident system,
Yes. Send the signal straight up, bounces back down. Between 1 and 10 megahertz, an NVIS antenna, or cloud burners as they're called, they will send a signal up and it'll come down within about 300 miles. 40 meters is great for this, 60 meters will work, 80 meters will work. We put an antenna up, actually we put this antenna right here up. The center point, the apex was 15 feet off the ground, each end's about 8 feet off the ground. Take this other one here, don't hook anything to it, lay it down as a reflector, and it sends a signal straight up. And it's a good antenna, not the best, but it worked. Renee was on it on 3971. And it was about 12:30, she looks over at me and she says, Frank, I need to give Charles some traffic on 3975. My antenna's gone. Okay. So I've got 2 other stations working 80 meters. Lee Stone's working one of them. He's using PSK or MT63-1000S. And I've got Don Coltrane on a different antenna, and he's running WinLink peer-to-peer on 35, I think he was at 3580 or 3570, somewhere in there. So I asked Lee, I said, Lee, do you mind tuning up on 3975 and see if you can raise Charles? And he says, absolutely, Frank. Pushes the tune button, calls Charles. I said, thank you, buddy. Go back to what you was doing. Hey, Don, yes, sir. Tune up if you don't mind and call Charles past the traffic. Absolutely. And I didn't really pay any attention to, what I'd said. We had run into an incident before with the 2 antennas, just 2 stations running. Around 10:30, 10:45, Lee's that I had, if that exercise was, this was at the SET, and before we were running the ARC exercise, and Lee says, Frank, I don't hear anybody. I'm not getting any more traffic. And Don says, we had the state split, had 32 counties and had them split, so we wouldn't have a pile up. So Renee was working from home, communications. I got on the 805. I said, Renee on DRATS, tell everybody that was on channel B that hadn't checked in to move over to A frequency. So she did. I got on 3975 and told everybody, move over here. The antenna A was still working, and all of a sudden Don got all this traffic that was trying to check in with Lee that couldn't. During the SET, he keys up K4GK. It's K4GK. Hey, Don, how you doing? Good, Charles, how are you? Not a bit of problem. The difference was the antennas. The first one was an NVIS. It did okay, but it wasn't near as strong as a half-wave dipole that was 70 feet up in the air. Now it did have 450 foot of coax going to it, but at 4 megahertz, and I was using half-inch coax, we had less than a dB loss. So we had a little bit of loss, but we had it up high enough that it did a pretty good job. Now the antenna that Don was on is a homemade Cobra. A Cobra antenna uses 100 foot of ladder line with a 4-to-1 balun on the bottom of it, and it comes up and it's 2 pieces of wire that goes out 70 feet, 1 and 2 hooked together. It comes back in 70, comes up and goes out. That's your standard Cobra. Well, what I got to build this with was Bell South telephone lead in. It's got 4 wires. So if I got 4 wires, I'm going to use them. I've got an extra 140 feet of wire in this thing. The physical length on this thing is 140 feet, but the electronic length is 4 times that on both sides. It's actually 1.05 wavelengths on 75 meters on 3975. It's a 5 dB gain antenna on 75 meters. When the other antennas went away, this one was still very strong. It still worked. Next time we do an exercise there at the Georgia Aries Command Center, Lee wants one of those put up, and I've got another one built that I'm going to put up for him. And we'll run a bunch of ladder line out and around to get over to the station. There's differences in antennas. They work different in different places. There's difference in gain. I've got a 160 meter antenna that's 275 feet long, and I'll put it up in the place of the 4-wire Cobra. And it works well with a 125 foot of ladder line and a 4-to-1 balun. 20 meters, oh, it's strong because it has so many multiples of 20 meters in that wire length. It works 160 well, it works 80. It's a collinear on 80, but 40 and 20, it works the best. Field day, we put up a 40 meter diamond shaped loop, 135 feet. At the bottom of it, 7 feet. At the top, 43. Okay, now where you feed this makes a big difference. If you feed it at the top, it takes off this angle right here. So you hit the upper ionosphere somewhere around Hawaii and you drop in Guam. For field day, that's not a good thing. But if you feed it at the bottom, instead of it taking this angle, it takes this angle and it takes off like this, and it hits about Mississippi and comes back down, and from Texas to California, strong, very strong antenna. We've used that a few times at field day on 40, and people will ask, how much power are you running? What are you doing? You've got the loudest signal on the band. Moved from Lee Newton Park out there and put it up in the field in front of the church, doesn't work as well. Same antenna, just changed the ground underneath it a little bit, and it doesn't work as well. Antennas, especially HF, will work different. VHF, you think it's the same all the time? It's not, especially in the mountains. When we work these races like the Jewel, the Death Race, I've been team lead for Snake Creek Gap for years and fight it every year. What seems to work the best is a J-pole, 18 feet high, bungee corded to the railing in front of the his and hers over here in the corner. That works. That's the sweet spot. At night, you can work anywhere. In the daytime, you take an HT and you go lay down next to the creek. It's just, it changes. When the iron ferrite heats up in these mountains, it sends your signal, it bounces it. At night, your signal will just kind of roll over them. In the daytime, it just hits and bounces it straight up. So it can be a challenge. We run into a problem at Reese Farms with the Death Race. Same thing. We went up there the Saturday before. We could hit everything in the world, middle of the day. Go up a week later, horrible. How many people noticed any difference the last week or two on the 805 when you go to check in? Atmospheric conditions, they affect VHF as well. 70 centimeters not as much, 900 not as much. Sometimes your cell phone seems to work better than other times, you know. They've got a small antenna in them just to get to a cell tower. Any questions? Anything? Yes, sir.
You mentioned the phone line.
Yes.
The phone line lead-in, the black phone line cable.
Yeah.
That small wire, you can make an antenna out of that.
Oh gosh, yeah.
That little bitty thin.
Yeah, it's like number 22 gauge. I've run as much as 500 watts on it before.
So you just cut it your actual length of what's band and just loop them together.
Yeah, well, it's 70 feet on each side, and when you get to this end, you just take one wire and two, and you crimp them, solder them together, come back in, and go out. The original Cobras, gosh, it was made years and decades ago, and it was a big old heavy thing made out of tubing. The commercial one that you buy now, you remember the TV ribbon that went to your TV rotator back when we had those kind of things? It was a flat ribbon. You had either 3 or 4 wires. Well, the original Cobra, I started to bring one, I didn't. It's got 3 wires. It looks like rotator cable. That's what it is. They just go out and back and out. Well, mine's got 4. It just goes out, back, and back in. It gives you the physical length is the same, it's 140 feet, but the electronic length gives you an extra 140 feet. Now, if you put an analyzer on mine, it's resident at 2.1 megahertz. With the internal tuner, you can go all over the 160 band, just touch it, and then it'll go click, 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 and it's happy. 75 meters from one end to the other, it's happy. There's portions of 40 that my internal tuner it doesn't want to do, and my antenna doesn't like 10 meters. The store-bought one, it'll tune up on 10 through 80. You give a little, you get a little. It's a compromise. It's like a monoband antenna, one that's cut a 2 meter only. This is a half wave for 2 meters. Doesn't work on 70 centimeters. Works like gangbusters. Now, if this coil was different in it, it could be placed different and be made to work for 2 meters and 70 centimeters, but it wouldn't be as strong on either one. It's a compromise. You get a little here, you lose a little there. But yeah, those are easy to build, and they work. They work well. I'll send you the plan.
Send me a copy.
Okay.
Cause you could use, RJ45 Ethernet cable.
Yeah. Michael Molden took Cat 5 cable and made one. He's got, and he just rolls. It's easy to roll up. He rolls his up. He uses it for deployment with Aries. He just took Cat 5 cable and took and twisted the pairs together. Instead of having 8, he's got 4, you know, and made a Cobra out of it. I talked to an engineer at Caltech one night on 20 meters, is looking for a radio check. And I was sitting there soldering some stuff up in the shack, and he said, I need a radio check. Anybody out there? We'll talk about my antenna. So, okay. It's K4SJR. Go ahead. Hey, K4SJR, this is so-and-so. He said, I'm in a little college in California, and we're building antennas. I said, yeah, what are you doing? He told me what he was doing, and I told him what I was operating on. I said, well, I got a beam, but I tuned up on the wire. It's a Cobra. He said, imagine that. He says, we're building one of those. And he asked me how it worked, and we got to talking, and I asked him, I says, you know, the wires are all together. It looks like they'd have a lot of capacitance loss there. He said, well, we got a computer over here, Frank. I can put that in. And he emailed me some. And I asked him, I said, put some space on it. If you space those wires out 5 1/4 inches apart, and that seems to be the magic place for it, it'll give you 9 dB gain. And that's massive on 75 meters. So I built one of them, and it does this in the wind. It didn't, you know, it didn't work as, it works good on paper, but just a regular Cobra, it works well that way. Antennas are easy to build. For a half-wave dipole, the magic number is 468. Divide your frequency into 468 and it'll give you the length. Always build a little bit long because it's easier to trim it back than it is to solder more onto it. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you.